G'day. Welcome back to Cookie's Fishroom. My name is Norm, and thank you once again for joining us. Today I will be talking to you about a deadly disease called Columnaris. But before I start, I just want to say a big thank you to those who've subscribed to our YouTube channel, followed us on Instagram, or joined us in our Facebook group. And please, if you haven't subscribed yet, please do so, and don't forget to smash that notification bell. So, Columnaris, what is it? It's a gram-negative disease that basically can wipe out every single fish in your tank. Nothing is immune to it. It is deadly to say the least, and it's not something that you want to get in your tank. So how do I get this disease? So, stress is the biggest factor in getting this disease. Stress factors come in all shapes and sizes. Incorrect water parameters is the number one key factor in all of this. High ammonia, high nitrates, and low GH. People usually only test the main four parameters and always seem to forget to test GH. I can't stress enough how important GH is in keeping this disease at bay from your tank. So, make sure your water parameters are on point always. Stress factors also include insufficient lighting. Bullying is one that always seems to be forgotten. So, a lot of people will start getting the Columnaris symptoms, you could say, white patches on their fish, and they've had bullying in their tank. First thing that comes to mind is it must be an injury. That's why it's got this white patch. Quickly grab the Malefix, quickly grab something that will heal this injury. No. The symptom is there because the stress factor has triggered the Columnaris. And how this happens is simple. Every single fish out there has this gram-negative bacteria on it. So, when you're in the shops, you're strolling around, you buy your fish, it's got nothing, looks healthy as, you're bringing that, and you don't quarantine it, you're bringing it straight into your tank. So, you need to keep these stress factors at bay. One thing I've learned over the last 3 decades of being in this hobby and keeping fish is that it wasn't as prevalent as it was 30 years ago as it is now. You never used to hear, oh, my fish has Columnaris. If somebody said that, you'll be like, what in the world is Columnaris? But now, every second thread on Facebook is how do I get rid of this disease and how did I get it? And the main reason why we didn't see it before as much as we see it now, is that the fish are bought and sold overseas or even interstate more than they were before. Back in the day, when I say back in the days, I'm talking back in the early 90s or mid 80s, guppies and other fish were sold at your local aquarium, and what was there was all you got. You'd have the odd few who used to advertise in the local paper and used to go to their place with your dad or your mum, pick out a fish you like for the old fish bowl, or if you were doing it in the proper way, a fish tank, and you wouldn't have to worry about this disease. But now, with fancy guppies being all the rage, and South American fish, South African cichlids, and a lot of the fancy guppies are coming from Asia, imports are inevitable. We've got so many guppies, I can't even list them, that have to come from Asia if you want them. Now, the travel factor plays a huge part in this. I've seen so many sellers open boxes with guppies that are feeling very ill or stressed. They quarantine them, and within days they develop Columnaris. And the reason for this is the travel factor, the handling, the fasting beforehand, the swimming in my own poop and pee, will cause this disease to flare its ugly head. The more you can avoid stress, the more likely we won't see this disease. So, a lot of the wholesalers are based in Thailand, Indonesia, Philippines, somewhere in Asia. That's where we get our fancy guppies from. Luckily nowadays, we have a lot of sellers who are based here within our own country and are breeding these. Try to support these sellers as much as possible. Try to support your local shop. You won't have as many problems with Columnaris as you would if you've got guppies from overseas. Even interstate can be an issue. What these fish go through in the mail or with a courier is unbelievable. Not something that you want to do too often. Just this week, I had fish posted to me on a Monday, and no disrespect to the seller, he's a great friend of mine. Thank you very much. You know who you are. You did the best you could do with packing for the shipping. There were heat bags, proper breathable bags used. He did everything right to the correct water level and even holes in the shipping container. But because of the postal service, it got lost in the mail. It ended up going back to the seller and back to me with, I think, about 2,800 kilometers one way between us. So a 5,600 kilometer round trip. The poor buggers died by the time they got here. And you know what? At the end of the day, money is money, but it hurts to see these fish suffer. So had they arrived alive, more than likely these fish would have developed some sort of stress-related illness like Columnaris. If you can avoid it, avoid it. I know in some circumstances you can't, but if you can, please do so. I do have a list of things here next to me to talk about. Now, the other way you can get this disease is to bring it into your home or into your tank via buying it through a store. When you buy fish, make sure you choose the right ones. Look at them carefully. Don't just go for colors, size, and don't go for just strains. Make sure when you pick the color, size, and strains that you've got, that you found, that you want, pick the ones that aren't struggling to breathe, that don't sit in a corner, that don't have the white patches, that don't look stressed. The ones who exhibit all those, or even have, swollen gills or a swollen head, they most likely will have the disease. You have to be very careful to what you bring into your own tank. Always quarantine them. Never forget that. That's the most important thing to do in this hobby. The other and last way that you can bring in this disease into your tank, if not quarantining fish, if you've already quarantined them, that is if a fish has the disease and she's pregnant. Now, 8 times out of 10, and this is an 80% rate, it will be females who get this disease. It's not to say males can't get it. Males can get stressed enough that they do get it, or the disease is that strong in the tank that they do get it, but females seem to be more susceptible to getting this disease. So, a lot of them seem to actually catch it or activate it whilst they are pregnant. The toll a pregnancy can take on a fish is massive. It uses a lot of the fish's energy, their minerals and vitamins up. So the female is super stressed, she gets Columnaris. A lot of the time, people will get it mixed up with dropsy because she will pine cone at the same time. Now, if that mother has Columnaris, 95% of her fry born will have the disease also, being active or not. I have tested this. This is not just a theory, this is proof. I have tested this on 20 different females, all with a disease, all pregnant. All their fry born, 95% had the disease, They were swabbed to confirm that they had it, even though they weren't displaying symptoms at some point. They all developed symptoms eventually, and they all passed away, unfortunately. The 5% survived, luckily. I'll put it down to pure luck. But that's the other way you can bring in this disease into your tanks, into your home. Now, the symptoms to look for, which is most important. This can make the difference in between basically getting rid of this disease, preventing it from wiping out your colony, or to losing everything. You got to look for these. Now I'm going to refer to my list that's just next to me. All right, first of all, red and brown gills. Red or brown gills. The disease always starts at the gills, always without fail, and it always swells it up. Now, it will cause the fish to flash, to rub its gills against the substrate or leaves. It will be swollen a red or brown color. And the reason for brown, I say brown, is because the flesh will be rotting because of the disease causing it to go brown when it's inside the gills. Now, I said flashing being another symptom, and because it starts inside the gills, the other place we tend to look for, it moves next to, usually, not always, is the mouth. You will experience white colored lips, so it will basically look like they're wearing lipstick, or it will become fuzzy and white. Cotton mouth, that's the other name for it. It is commonly known as cotton mouth. So if you see your fish displaying symptoms of cotton mouth, that is Columnaris. There is no such thing as cotton mouth on its own. When you're treating cotton mouth, you're treating that disease, Columnaris. The next symptom to look for is, and this is in no particular order, of course, but an arched or bent spine. Now, 9 times out of 10, folks tend to think, well, my fish has a genetic disorder, which is rubbish because it can't develop a genetic disorder, in the middle of its life. It will be born with it if it does have one. Okay, the bent spine will be there at birth, or it has scoliosis or TB. Now, there is a difference and there is a way of knowing which is which. With TB and scoliosis, you have what I like to call the caterpillar effect on the spine. It tends to be wavy. With Columnaris, you tend to get a spine that bends and arches. It looks like the fish is struggling to keep its tail up there, holding its head up. Now, when you see that, there is something wrong with that fish. Don't run off to get levamisole. Don't run off to get Melfix. Start treating for Columnaris straight away. Straight away. And another one, gasping for air. So, an early sign, a good sign to look for, is to see the fish gasping for air. It will be hovering top of the tank, mid-tank sometimes, breathing like it's just run a marathon. That's because the gills are rotting. It can't get enough air into its lungs, and it's struggling. It will struggle when this disease kicks in. So that's another symptom to save you from, losing your whole colony. And the last symptom is probably the most common that people look for, is the white patches. Now, the white patches also extend to the fins and the tail. Most of the time you will see it mid to back of the fish as a band, a saddle, as it used to be called saddleback disease. It will wrap itself around the back of the fish just before the tail, or you will see a patch on the top of the forehead, the top of the head. Also, it will spread from the body to the fins, just where the body and the fins join up. you'll see a white patch moving onto the fins. Same thing for the dorsal fin on top of the fish and the tail. Now, to know the difference between fin rot and that, it's simple. Fin rot will start at the edge of the fins and will look like it's melting. Columnaris will start at the start of the fins, not the end, the start where it joins the body. So always look for that. The problem is if you rely on the patches and the fins, most of the time you're too late. The fish will be at the point where its organs are beginning to shut down and the disease has spread too far into its body. So hopefully you've noticed and taken note of all these other symptoms first. All right, so I'm going to move on to what misconceptions there are surrounding this disease first. All right, so first thing is first, that it has to have this white patch for it to be columnaris. No, it doesn't. All it needs is to have swollen gills. The white patches are the fish throwing up its white flag and say, hey, my body can't handle this anymore. I'm out. I'm done. White patches are the last symptom to look for. White patches is when you run like hell to that aquarium or eBay or wherever you get your meds from and start clicking away and ordering what you need to get rid of it. Pull that fish out into quarantine as soon as possible. Okay. It must be dropsy. There are raised scales. No, it's still columnaris. It is very common for that area where it's infected externally, where you see that white patch, to have the raised scales. It's because the rotting flesh is pushing it up. There will be an infection internally, like fluid, so that will make it raise the scales. Which brings me on to my next point. It must be dropsy. Again, it seems to be swollen in areas in its chest. Because the infection does attack, the bacteria, does attack the fish internally. It will attack its organs. It will cause an infection internally, and you may possibly get a fluid buildup to make it look like it has dropsy. So be aware of that. And the only way you will be able to tell the difference is to look for the other symptoms I've already mentioned: fins, gills, flashing, patches, etc., lips. All right. Now, another misconception is the TB and scoliosis I've already mentioned. Remember to look at the shape of the fish and don't solely rely on it being arched or bent, or arched or caterpillar shaped, because they're totally different. TB will have lesions. Scoliosis, again, will have that caterpillar look to the fish, or even a bent sideways look. So a fish body won't always be straight. The head may be bent left or right. That will be another possibility for scoliosis. You won't see it bridge style. Very, very unlikely, and it's columnaris. All right. Now, what people want to know the most is, how do I treat it? Now, this is the most important information you will hear from me through this whole video. Listen to what you want, but miss out on what you want. Forward it, rewind it, but remember this part of the video. First of all, how do I treat it? You grab the sick fish, any other fish exhibiting any sort of symptom at all, and put them all, even if you're unsure, put it into a hospital tank. Now, people say to me, well, why don't I just leave them all together, since the bacteria is already in my main tank? Why don't I just leave it in my main tank and treat them in there? You don't do that, because there are fish in there that will be healthy that don't have this bacteria yet. What you do, you treat the sick in a hospital tank. You treat the good. You still treat the good. You're actually treating the tank itself, the surfaces, the bacteria in the main tank, so that the good fish don't get this disease. It's very important that you separate the two and treat the two separately. Now, a sulfur-based medication should get rid of this disease. I say should, as long as it hasn't got into your tank too far in, okay? It gets to the point where this disease spreads so much, has gone so far that you do have to nuke the whole tank and start again. That's your best option, okay? So if you see all your fish exhibiting symptoms, there is no point to go and treat the whole tank and all these fish. I suggest nuking the tank, getting yourself some new substrate, new filter media, clean those plants, scrub them, use some bleach in the tank, and start again. Start the whole thing again. Recycle that tank. Now, say it's not that far in, and you've only got a couple of sick fish, some in the quarantine tank, some in your main tank. Get your hands on a sulfur-based medication. There is CChem Sulfurplex, there's API triple sulfur, and my most used and favorite, Blue Planet Trisulfur. Blue Planet Trisulfur does cover most secondary infections. And when I say that, I'm talking about Popeye, dropsy, and anything that will come as, I guess, fin rot will be one of them too, because it does attack the fins. Now, you use that alongside with aquarium salt. The two don't interact and are fine to use together. Choose which one of those three is freely available in your country. I know for those who are not in Australia, Blue Planet Trisulfur is available on eBay for those who want to purchase it. At the moment, COVID is kind of making international transport a little slow because most of our airports are closed over here in Australia, so you get the odd flight or two going internationally for mail. So you get those medications going and working as fast as possible, and you keep going with whatever the packaging suggests you to do. Follow those instructions. If after a couple of weeks, or what the instructions say to be its maximum use, you don't see any sort of improvement, and bear in mind, when I say improvement, I mean no other fish getting sick. I don't mean the fish that are already sick getting better, because by the time you notice it's got Columnaris, it's very unlikely that fish will recover if it's too far in, meaning white patches. So your best hope is to pray that the fish that are just have symptoms like brown and red gills, flashing, and those who are healthy don't contract it and don't get any worse. So watch those fish. If they get better from the treatment suggested, great. Keep an eye on them for a week afterwards. Make sure that they don't have any symptoms for that week afterwards, and then feel free to put them back into the main community tank. Say they don't get better. You've been treating for 3-4 weeks and you see no improvement. Mind you, I treated for 3 months before I was able to get rid of this deadly disease. Say though, you've been treating for 6 weeks and you've had absolutely enough, you've spent enough money on sulfur-based products and you're not getting anywhere. The next step is to use an antibiotic. Now, it can't be just any antibiotic, and there's a reason for that. The bacteria itself, a gram-negative bacteria, has a cell that basically can't be broken into by all sorts of fluids, only certain types. Gram-negative bacteria are the strongest bacteria there is out there, thus it's the hardest to kill. Okay, so this is COVID for fish. You want to be extra careful. Now, it will live on surfaces, thus again, I suggested cleaning all surfaces if you do have this in your tank, including plants. So, you have to choose an antibiotic that works and not all work. Amoxicillin, ciprofloxacin, and tetracycline have all worked great for me and to the people who I've helped with. and it will take 2 to 6 weeks for these medications to work. You do have to find a source for them depending on which country you're from. I know Canada and the UK have some very tough laws to get these medications. Here in Australia, you can go see a vet, same as the US. I know that you can get some of these antibiotics freely on some websites such as Amazon and eBay. I have purchased mostly mine at eBay. So get your hands on some of that. Follow the instructions once again. If they don't come with instructions, I suggest to do a 10-day course at a minimum of 500 milligrams per day, be it one, you split it up into 2 doses or 1 dose per day. That's entirely up to you. But don't forget to keep the aquarium salt going. And most importantly, because you are using antibiotics, you will crash your cycle. So with that, you have to, I can't stress it anymore, dose some beneficial bacteria into your tank. The one that I use and find the most successful is Nutrifin Cycle. To me, stability is very, very weak. A lot of people seem to use it. It's almost watered down compared to Cycle. And I don't know which website it is myself, as I didn't write this, but there is a website that actually tests all these beneficial bacteria up against each other. And Nutrifin Cycle actually does quite well for itself. It comes out with the most beneficial bacteria per, I think, cubic liter or milliliter or something like that. So if you want to find it, go ahead, Google it. But I do recommend Nutrifin Cycle. If you don't do that, even using the sulfur-based products, you run the risk of crashing your whole cycle, inducing more stress on those already sick fish and on those who are borderline to catch this disease. And trust me, you're going to do everything you can not to let this get any worse than it already is. Alrighty, now, sometimes even you read books, you read websites when you get this disease, or you talk to other people on Facebook groups about medications that they've used to, that they can suggest that work for you. One thing I'm going to say is medications work differently for everybody. Everybody will recommend something different, and I'm recommending this based on my personal experience as somebody who's worked on this in a lab and who has tested this on numerous amounts of fish. And when I say this, I'm talking about 300 plus guppies in the same place, same amount of water, same water parameters, same level of gram-negative bacteria active, you could say, at the same stage in the cycle of Columnaris. Now, some meds claim to work, and they may work for some people, but these medications were tested, fish were swabbed, and it made no difference to them. And when I say no, none to little difference in their health on improving. A lot of people suggest to me Canaplex and Furin 2, both of which did not make any difference to my fish when we were testing these fish. A lot of fish were tested and none of them showed improvement with these medications. And if anything, a couple of fish actually, because they weren't getting the medications and attention that they did require at the time, they died because we wasted our time using them. Now, I'm not saying that this won't work for everybody. I'm sure it's worked for somebody out there, but bear in mind, I've tested this on hundreds of fish infected with the gram-negative bacteria, and we were shown results that we weren't very impressed with and very slow to react if there was any sort of improvement. And I use that word very lightly. Now, what happens if your fish are dying and you've got no choice? You know, you're getting frustrated, the antibiotics are taking time, and you're losing fish every single day, 4, 5, 6 fish, and you're not left with much. Again, at that point, I'll suggest nuking the tank. If the fish are showing signs of the white patches where it's going down, sometimes the flesh rots to the point where you can see their bones. If they're suffering, put them out of their misery. as much as it hurts me to say, I'd rather see the clove oil being used than them sitting in a tank, finding it hard to breathe with rotting flesh falling off their bones. Lately, I have been experimenting and trying more medications to find a better way of treating this disease. So I have found a way of getting rid of this faster than the trisulfur and the antibiotics used on their own or one after each other. What I have tried is a combination of trisulfur, aquarium salt, and tetracycline. Now, using those three things with a minimum of a 500 milligram, bear in mind 500 milligrams a day of tetracycline, combine those three together with pristine water. Good aeration is very important for those gills when you're treating them inside that quarantine tank, and enough, not too much of I wouldn't say too much of other stress factors like too bright lights and everything like that, because in a quarantine tank you don't have like trees, you don't have caves and all that for them to hide in. It's meant to be just a clean bottom with no decorations. So limit the amount of light to them as well. You don't need that much light if you don't have plants anyways. So with the least amount of stress factors, I highly recommend trying those three things together over a 2-week period, 14 days, but the application of it has to be different from what you're used to doing. Get all three dissolved into 30 mils of water from the fish's tank, from the quarantine tank, so the parameters match. Melt that, if the trisulfur comes in as tablet forms, melt it in there with the salt and put it all together, swirl it around, add their dinner or breakfast into that little cup that you've got with the medications mixed into it. Let it soak in there for an hour. By doing that, that combination of medications are soaked up into the food. You pour that in there 1 hour later, you pour it in there, and the fish will consume it going straight into their bodies. But also at the same time, because you've poured it in the tank, it will be externally to them in the water column as well. So they get a double dose of it. So this is not just medicated flakes. Remember this. This has medication in the actual water. So they're getting it 2 ways. Now, I've only tested this in the last couple of months on probably about 50 subjects, and I've had pretty good results over the first 8 days. So a 2-week period usually ensures that the fish recovers if it's not too far into the cycle of the columnaris. You don't see too many white patches, or you don't see any exposed flesh or bones, basically. Now, give that a shot. That's your best bet at smashing this disease out of the park completely. It's worked wonders for me so far, and I highly recommend that you give this a go. So, now, lastly, how do I prevent getting this disease? So, quarantining your fish is the biggest way of preventing this disease. For those who know my quarantine process, you know I treat for gram-negative bacteria in week 2. And for those who don't know it, there is a video on my quarantine process. There is also a thread on Cookie's Fishroom that actually is written up, and you can see what is done week by week. It's all listed there with the medications that you need. So please jump on Facebook, join Cookie's Fishroom if you haven't yet, and have a read of this quarantine process. Quarantining ensures that this disease does not come into your tank, regardless if your fish are getting stressed for any reason. Just remember that. It is the most important thing to do in the whole hobby. I can't fathom why anybody would add fish into a tank without quarantining them first. It's not too hard to do, and it doesn't take much, and it doesn't cost hardly anything at all to do, apart from the cost of the medications that you should have on hand regardless, just in case. Now, some people buy second-hand tanks, and when you do buy second-hand tanks, depending on how old it is, if it was holding water for a certain amount of period of time before you got that tank, the Columnaris will be sitting on surfaces. Make sure you give it a good clean with either vinegar and warm water, or get into it with bleach and warm water. Get rid of it on every surface possible. It can come in with plants, it can come in with snails. Quarantine those snails. Snails will be okay with half, remember this, not the full dosage of aquarium salt that's on the pack, but it has been tested on even mystery and apple snails, completely fine, ram's horns, included. All snails I've tested this on is absolutely fine, and you won't get any fallback from basically using salt to quarantine your fish. It will kill the disease if left long enough. 5 days is what I've quarantined my snails with. I've had no issues, and I continue to feed them as per normal. Now, lastly, the other way you can prevent this disease is to clean your plants when you bring them in. Don't forget to use the quarantine process that we have up in Cookie's Fishroom. There is a thread on that also. Just log in, jump on, join the group, and have a read of it. It is highly recommended to stop you bringing in anything into the tank, including parasites, worms, anything that you don't want there, all the nasties. And lastly, once you've gotten rid of this disease, or if you're buying a secondhand tank of someone and you're not too sure what you're bringing into your house, get rid of all the filter media, cycle that tank all over again. It is vital that you do that. And also, if you have substrate that can't be washed with bleach, some aquarium salts can't be done, like fluve or stratum, you will lose all the beneficial fertilizer in it if you do that. Wash out that substrate, get rid of all the bacteria in it, put new filter media inside your filter, give that filter a good scrub, and I promise you, you won't have to deal with this disease anytime soon if you follow everything I have said today. Everything to prevent this disease is much more, and it is much better than having to cure it. Prevention is always the key. Thank you again for joining us at Cookie's Fishroom, and we look forward to seeing you next week once again. Thank you very much, fishy friends, and wherever you are in this world, take good care of yourself. See you next week.